Good afternoon, everyone. It's 4 p.m. here in Singapore, and a very warm welcome to all of you to today's session of Green Shoots. My name is Lionel, and I'll be your host for this opening segment of the program. The Green Shoots sessions are a community initiative supported by Temasek. We run these sessions on a regular basis throughout the course of the year to discuss some of the more salient topics on the global fintech agenda. For our returning viewers, a very warm welcome back. Very happy to have you back, and thank you for your continued support. For new viewers, we are very excited to have you. Do stick around. Today's session will be interactive, so please feel free to fire off any questions you may have to our speakers via the Zoom Q&A function. Now, today's discussion will focus on cross-border connectivity and of payments, and specifically real-time payments, or RTP. Now, RTP for most of us is already a reality, with RTP systems already implemented in over 60 countries and counting worldwide. Now, the question that is here for us is connecting these RTP systems could unlock faster, cheaper, more transparent, more inclusive cross-border payment arrangements worldwide. And in that spirit, we are very pleased and we're very excited to have for you today a double bill event that will take a closer look at two of the emerging and very prominent pathways to global RTP connectivity. Our first panel will take a look at the efforts by a pioneering group of 4 countries to build direct system-to-system RTP linkages. And our second panel today will take a look at the Project Nexus blueprint that was recently published by the Bank of International Settlements Innovation Hub in Singapore that seeks to establish multilateral connectivity of RTP. Now, without further ado, let's kick off our first panel, where we have experts from 4 of the central banks at the very forefront of the conversations in terms of bilateral linkages of RTP. May I introduce today first Mr. Fraziali Ismail, Assistant Governor of Bank Negara Malaysia, Mr. P. Vasudevan, Chief General Manager of the Reserve Bank of India, Ms. Siritida Panomwan Ayudhya, Assistant Governor of the Bank of Thailand, and MAS's own Chief Fintech Officer, Mr. Sopnendu Mohanty. Thank you all panelists for joining us, and to give some sense of scale to the viewers, the audience today, in terms of the context of the conversation we're having today. Collectively, these 4 RTP systems of these 4 countries saw over 25 billion RTP transactions through their systems last year, with the total transaction values well in excess of US $1 trillion. So collectively, that's a very big amount. Maybe I could look at the individual makeup of each system and ask each of our speakers now to talk us through some of the characteristics of your payment systems, your RTP systems. What kind of adoption levels are you seeing domestically in terms of RTP? And maybe some of the features and functionalities that might be relevant to cross-border today. And if I could, maybe going by the order of introductions, maybe I could turn to AG Fraziali first to kick us off.
Thank you. Let me first begin by thanking MAS and the organizing team for bringing us together today on this very relevant and timely topic, and given all the developments that we're seeing in the space. For Malaysia, domestically, like most other countries, we have sought to modernize and raise our game in this real payment sphere. By in December 2018, we launched our real-time retail payments platform, or RPP. Now, with that system, that enables consumers to transfer real-time, seamlessly, 24/7, 365, between bank accounts and non-bank payment systems, their wallets, for example, simply by referencing using their mobile numbers or by scanning a common QR code. It's clearly, that has resulted in faster, cheaper, and more accessible payment systems. Additionally, of course, as you might be aware, we are also embarking on this endeavor to cross-border payment arrangements. In June this year, we launched a real-time payment system linkage with the BOT that facilitates instant and seamless linkage between Malaysia and Thailand. And similar efforts are being pursued so that we can have similar arrangements with Singapore, with Indonesia, and the Philippines. That being said, I'm certainly more than happy to share our perspectives and experience, and I certainly look forward to hear from my fellow panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Fraziali. If I can move to Mr. Vasudevan next. Vasu?
Thank you, Lionel, and a very good morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone. It's indeed my great pleasure as well to be part of this hugely popular Green Shoots event. Green is the word now. I'm also grateful to the organizers for inviting us and being part of this esteemed panel comprising central bank experts. See, we in India have a bouquet of fast payment options, what we call as fast payments here, you call as RTP or real-time payments there. So we have, you must all have heard of the Unified Payments Interface or UPI. That's also part of the project Nexus that Lionel was talking about. That probably will be covered a little bit later. And UPI is a 5-year-old baby in the Indian context, launched in 2016. It has just what to say, last month we handled 324 billion transactions, 3.24 billion transactions in UPI. And the value is also significantly increasing by the day. But like we say in all retail payments, the value is actually very small in terms of the number of people who come in. So the present activity that we see is around US $65 billion. And that's almost this is everyday volume. In fact, everyday volume in UPI is 116 million for value 65 billion. And we have, as I was saying, multiple products. So we have what we call as the IMPS, and we also have in our context, see, even RTGS becomes typically a retail payment system because of the values that are there. 200,000 rupees is the minimum value of a transaction in RTGS. And 200,000, if you compare to a US dollar, it's around 2,750. So we have some jurisdictions which have kept, I know, up to $300,000 as a cap for retail. So typically for us, all these things become part of the retail or fast payment systems. UPI, let me talk about it because it's ultra modern and very, very popular retail payment system, not only here, but in terms of interest from other jurisdictions as well. UPI can take care of both collect and pay payments, both push and pull payments. UPI is a feature-rich, open architecture-based payment system. It actually facilitates both P2P and P2M payments. Incidentally, one of the bigger things we have seen during the recent pandemic is that the P2M payments are also significantly increasing and are on par with the P2P payments. P2P is having a share of 55%, but the use cases are increasing for P2M payments as well. And most important part of UPI is that maybe we will also get a chance to talk about it a little later, is about the involvement of non-banks, what we call as popularly fintechs and big techs also in the payments chain. So typically the transaction flow is instantaneous. The settlements may happen between banks a little later, but still because of the RTGS being 24/7 in Indian context, working on Saturdays, Sundays, and holidays as well. So we facilitate multiple settlements for UPI as well in the RTGS, 6 settlements a day. So the settlements between banks also becomes more or less full time. And when I say UPI is ultra modern because it relies on a customized version of ISO 20422 and also relies on a number of APIs to complete the transaction. So there are extremely beautiful features that are perfectly suited for cross-border linkages. We will continue to talk about a little more of them as we go ahead. And as I said, I'm indeed very grateful to be here, and we will continue the discussions forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Vasu. Over to you, Siritida.
Yes, thank you, Lionel, and good afternoon to all. So for Thailand, faster payment journey with PromptPay has started 4 years ago, but it has been very rich experience that transformed the life of the majority of Thai. And I can say that it's a game changer in helping Thailand become a digital payment society. This is so true, especially during the current pandemic that we have seen the highest record of e-payment usage, such as number of PromptPay registration now is over 58 million number, considering that our population is 70 million now. An average of transaction of 24 million per day, and this has peaked at 33 million transactions. The number of Thai QR payment acceptance point have increased to over 70 million or 7 million all over the country. Having a strong RTP infrastructure, many innovative digital payment services have been developed in on this PromptPay infrastructure. And moving forward, we are currently working on a future payment system roadmap, where we will focus on next generation digital financial infrastructure development to facilitate digital finance transaction, cross-border linkage expansion, new innovative service to facilitate customer needs and enhance risk management to support system resilience. Thank you.
And last but certainly not least, Somindu.
Okay. Well, I think it's a rainy day today in Singapore. Warm welcome anyway to all our friends from India, Malaysia, and Thailand. Good to see all of you together. Well, I think what Thailand, Malaysia, India have spoken truly reflects a common trend in the market. Now I will give a little short reflection on Singapore's own journey when it comes to retail payment. We had a faster payment in 2014. It went live, quite popular. The faster payment, as Mr. Vasudevan spoke, there's an RTGS system, there's RTGS payment system, and there's a faster payment system for smaller values. But one thing we realized in early 2017 and 2016, as fintechs were dramatically shifting the payment narrative, they're making payments far more intuitive, far more experientially much better than what banks used to do. It was important for us to enhance that experience of small value retail payment so that we can make payments processed through banking system equally attractive and efficient. So that led to launch of Pay Now. Now, during that time, I remember clearly there was this strong desire from the banks to build apps, payment apps, and some did try to put some apps there, which was very successful. I'd say that's not bad. But one thing happened when we introduced Pay Now as a superior experience interface to do domestic payment. There's a shift on consumer behavior on how people perceive paying money to each other when there's an account-to-account transfer. So Pay Now was introduced, and we had some almost, I'll not say mandated, but clearly communicated to the banks how we'd like the payment experience should be. It should be 3 clicks. The cost should be 0. And the only thing you need to know from both sides is your mobile phone number or your national identity number, which here we call as NRIC number. That's it. And the experience should be smooth, and they should not necessarily get into the banking system to pay each other. And that was the birth of Pay Now. Now, we didn't expect it to be so popular because there was this shift happening from old-fashioned payments to newer paying through apps. Now we are suddenly introducing a payment system which banks can run without creating an app. So there's a need to shift the consumer behavior. But we're extremely lucky that from 2017, and now if I count where we have moved, almost 4 out of 5 Singaporeans resident now have a Pay Now account. Almost 85% of businesses use Pay Now as a way to do small value transfer. I didn't expect this to see what I'm seeing today. We are processing for a small country like Singapore, we are processing monthly $7 billion worth of transfers on the Pay Now small value. Remember, these are small value transfers on a monthly basis, almost 17 million monthly transactions. Well, that really sets certain learning for us that consumers value experience, consumers value safety. That's why they prefer to stay within the banking rails for account transfers. Consumers prefer and very price sensitive, especially when they're sending money to each other's account. So at a 0 cost, 3 clicks, only thing you need to know your mobile phone number was an ultimate design, which are a delightful opportunity, a delightful experience for consumer to adopt electronic payments. And well, we didn't predict COVID-19, and COVID-19 came, and thankfully we had this Pay Now infrastructure. It became a critical infrastructure, a critical service which many Singaporeans used during this lockdown period, and they are now it's a part of the mainstream payment system. And to close this thing, I would end with a small story. I don't know if anyone has visited Singapore, and there is a place in front of us, Singapore Stock Exchange, which serves satay. Actually, people during evening time, they clear the road and people sit there, and they are served satay. That is the most difficult place in Singapore when it comes to switching for electronic payment from cash. They still love the cash as the way to accept payment for the satay they serve. And during COVID-19, and towards when things opened up, I went to same satay place, and I was very delighted. They told me that, do you have we can accept money through PayNow. That day I felt PayNow has become mainstream payment infrastructure for ordinary Singaporeans. Thank you, Lionel.
Thank you, Somnendu. And I think I think across the board, we're seeing some very tremendous figures, tremendous levels of adoption, transactions, and of course, some very tremendous anecdotes as well. I think that's made all the more impactful when we consider that these are examples that are taking place in our own localized ecosystems. And then we think about the prospects of connecting all these ecosystems via RTP linkages, and that's so much more exponential in terms of the benefits for the end user. Now, we actually have a live linkage up and running right now. Earlier this year, Singapore and Thailand launched the linkage of PayNow and PromptPay, and obviously the linkage has been operational for some months now. So if I could turn again to Somnendu and Sritida, what kind of adoption levels, take-up are you seeing? Any anecdotes similarly from there? Any findings from the early data that's coming in?
I start first.
Let's
Okay. Yes, I may say that we are very, very proud of PromptPay now. Back in 2019, where we started this project, Thailand already had experience in digital payment in both domestic and cross-border QR payment linkage with many ASEAN countries. So we were ready and confident to move forward to cross-border system linkage for fund transfer and remittance like the PromptPay now linkage, which was more complex than other previous project. The new cross-border service will address customer long-standing pain point and high cost. This new system linkage provide fast, secure, cost-effective payment service that enhance convenience for our customer, including migrant worker, tourists, businesses, and also our e-commerce transaction. And it will also further foster bilateral trade between both countries, facilitated by settlement in local currency. During the 2 years of this project development, we have gained invaluable experience from working with more than 14 international and professional entities. Especially working during the pandemic situation was very, very challenging, given that we had to work and solve the problem, including a technical, business, and a legal issue, only through the virtual meeting. Therefore, the efficient communication and information flow among all stakeholders were one of the key success factors. Since this new system linkage launched in late April this year, PromptPay now has grown in popularity. We observe that the statistic is growing. The total number of inward and outward transaction from April to July was more than 11 million US dollar. And the average value was around like 215 US dollar per transaction, which is a low ticket size, showing that it was used for retail customer in daily life. Moreover, we also looking ahead in terms of scalability. There has been interest from the industry of both countries to progressively scale the linkage to include more participants and extend transfer limit to cater for business or transaction in the future as well. PromptPay now linkage represent the key milestone in our digital payment journey. And I believe that The adoption and uses will grow continuously due to its strong feature, being fast, secure, convenient, and cost-effective compared to those in the market. Thank you.
Thank you, Srijita. Maybe riding on the point that you made earlier about scalability now, and if I could turn to Fraziali and Vasu, because obviously Pay Now Prompt Pay or Prompt Pay Now started on a P2P remittance, low ticket size kind of a flow. And as Srijita said, there are plans to scale up the linkage, and obviously the ideal end state would be to encompass all the types of cross-border payments that could take place between the two countries, which is the same case for any other linkage that we will try to pursue vis-a-vis RTP. What do you think would be the bread and butter of these linkages going forward? Because we're all starting, let's say, the immediate takeaway of a linkage is naturally to the man on the street, the ability to send an instant remittance at very low cost. But P2P remittances may not be the prevailing use case at the end of the day. I just wanted to tap your thoughts quickly, Fraziali and Vasu, what you saw as the likely champions, if I can call it, of the linkages at the end of the day. Is it going to be QR? Is it going to be corporate payments, wholesale payments? What are your thoughts?
Shall I start first, Sri?
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I think certainly remittances will be quite key at this point in time, for simply because if you talk about the migrant population in the region, and there are easily about 10 million of them. So so the attractiveness of a safe system, cost savings. We're talking about globally the cost is around 6.4%. Over Malaysia, we have really managed to bring it down below 3%. But still, it's a big amount of money for this group of people. And certainly in the context of a post-COVID world, where this is really a humanitarian challenge for us to be able to transfer funds across the world safely and pretty quickly. So, and importantly also for Malaysia, given the success of the RPP, even the migrant population, they are used to that kind of efficient system. So it's only a question of a natural extension to go for their cross-border remittance transaction. And certainly, such simplicity is a big way for us to really mitigate the re-emergence of hawala, for example. It's always there, hawala. It's not a big problem in Malaysia. But yet, given the simplicity of such offering, it could almost rise up pretty easily and quickly. And of course, we spoke about it earlier, Prompt Pay and Pay Now. The next step, of course, would be naturally, Malaysians, Indonesians, Singaporeans, ASEANs. We are prolific travelers. Maybe given the rise of or the availability of low-cost airfares or air carriers in the region, so regional tourism is a very big thing. So the very fact that we can actually employ this, that certainly will bring a lot of benefits instantly. Of course now the whole tourism industry is ravaged by COVID, but certainly I think to the fact that people are getting used to it in using it domestically, it's just a mere extension for us to use it when we travel across to our neighbors. Of course, importantly, I think we really need to lock in the behavioral change that we saw given this COVID experience to our for life beyond COVID, be it domestically or when we travel abroad. And I think beyond this, of course, later we can touch upon B2B arrangements and things like that. But naturally, of course, given the fact that but ASEAN as a region is so deeply integrated in terms of intra-regional trade, that's certainly an aspect that we can explore going forward. I'll pause here.
I also have a few points to share. I too agree that in the present lockdown type of situation where travel is a little difficult, maybe restricted in some places, the remittances will play a very important role. India is Everyone knows the biggest recipient of inbound remittances. We have 15% of the world share. 83 billion was the remittance we received last year, notwithstanding the COVID lockdown. And India and Singapore, if I take, for example, Singapore also sends in around $1+ billion every year. So the P2P remittance will be a very big, very good use case for a cross-border purpose. And as and when the unlockdown happens, again, I'm taking the India-Singapore example. We have 1 million+ visitors that move from India, and we have a lot of tourism traffic happening between Malaysia, Thailand, India, of course, and Singapore. So we will definitely have those merchant payments coming in, and when the merchants payment come in, typically we will expect the users to be comfortable with the QR code type of payments, where I have the same app that is provided to me by the domestic bank or my domestic app provider. I use the same app at the merchant and make a payment seamlessly. So we have to provide for all use cases so that the attractiveness for the users are very much there, be it P2P, be it P2M, be it even, let me tell you, in some cases where we have now enabled in UPI is to say pay donations for a specific purpose as well, or certain prepaid voucher type of activity that can be put in on the UPI. So multiple use cases can be possible as and when the demand comes in. It will be nice to open up the channels. So at the build stage, at the conceptualization stage, we should look at all these possibilities and have it in place. And depending on expectations, for example, many of these fast payments will probably expect the user to have a smartphone. Now, how do we provide the same service to a guy who doesn't have a phone or who has a feature phone? So we need to look at it. And obviously the fact that comes in all these cases is that what if there is no network? We all assume that the network is there for every transaction to happen. So how do we look at situations where there is no network? In India, we are exploring all these use cases so that every person gets access, the access is democratized, and the same experience is available for cross-border purposes as well. So typically, the world is going to be one single place, borderless and seamless. I don't want to take the example of COVID. COVID has made sure that the national boundaries are no more there. But when cross-border transactions pick up and when the systems get interlinked, definitely the payments also will become borderless. And that's how the systems are going to be useful, cheaper and faster. Ultimately, if we have to beat the present modes of transfer, we have to be more efficient. We have to sell it as a nice activity, which are a user experience that we will be getting. Present experience of 7 days or 3 days for transactions cross-border, $7, $10 for $100 transaction, or whatever we say as a percentage basis, are definitely not acceptable. And fast payments are the ideal solutions for all these things. And we have to build in all types of use cases, and the acceptance will just keep rising and rising. So we'll have to probably start thinking of volumes. How do we handle that in our systems when we build it? Because the volumes are just going to significantly increase, exponentially increase. So that's one thing I look at from a cross-border perspective. Thank you.
Let's talk a bit. Sorry.
Lionel, because I have to make him go to another dialogue with Africa. Can I just quickly intervene, and then I can say bye to all our colleagues? You know, from our own experience with Thailand, let me give my own reflection. While AG Siritit has expressed the success in terms of number, let me express the success in terms of value. From Singapore side, we moved close to 14 million Singapore dollars from April onwards on the Prompt Pay Now connectivity. Just that $14 million would have saved close to a $1.4 million of expenses, which would have gone to fees to somebody.
Yeah,
that's a lot of money for people back in Thailand. And that money would have been lost to something which we don't want to be lost. We want the people who earn in Singapore, when they send money back home, $1.4 million. Think about it. It's a lot of money. And having that connectivity solved made it easier and cheaper, and also added more value to the transfer. That's one reflection. The second reflection I had from that experience is the ticket size. On average, Singapore, Thailand, through SWIFT network was $5,000, one ticket, average ticket size. This went down to $300. What it signifies that it has become almost seamlessly like a domestic payment, because our domestic payment in our domestic pay now was around $300. The same mentality is now coming when you're sending money back home. So small value, you can quickly decide, send it over the network, and you may end up in sending more remittance because now you're sending smaller values at regular interval. I think that ability for people to send back home small value emergency money at low cost makes a huge difference to people back in home when they're remitting back home money through the account transfer. And third, this money has moved on trusted banking rail. KYC, AMLs, sanction checking, to all the bad thing which we associate with a payment not regulated is out. You're moving money on safe networks, safe rails under the full compliance regime applied to this transfer. So these are the three big reflections. I'm hoping that as we connect to Malaysia, India, we will see more and more such value in our cross-border connectivity. With that, I want to say thank you to my colleagues from India, Malaysia, and Thailand. We'll soon catch up in different setting and different forum and different meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Somnendu. I think a point that's relevant and things that the industry will want to hear is Somnendu mentioned that Pay Now Prompt Pay has solved for full compliance with AML, and I think that's traditionally been one of the challenges in terms of speed of a payment, right? Across the payment chain, different institutions have to do AML sanctions checks, etc., and that lengthens the time of a payment from days to possibly weeks. Now, if I could turn to Siritida, could you tell us how Pay Now Prompt Pay did it? I think that's a question all of industry would like to know.
Yes, for the AML CFT screening has been a very important issue for Prompt Pay Now project. We spend quite a lot of time on this issue to find a solution that support this service to be safe and secure in order to gain trust from the customer and counterparties. And due to the different in AML CFT regulation and screening practice in each country, we had to identify a validation process that would comply with and be acceptable to both jurisdictions, but it would not lower any standard and at the same time keep costs in check. And finally, we found the acceptable solution to do a real-time sanction screening, which satisfy all involved party. But I'm not going to detail of the technical issue and the operation.
Thank you, Siritida. So it feels like real-time screening is the play that was made for Pay Now Prompt Pay. Now, coming back to the topic of speed, the flip side of speed is that not necessarily everybody wants a faster payment. And there could be valid reasons for this. Security is one, because in most cases, if it's a good payment, that's fine. But if it's a fraudulent payment, the funds are out of your account instantaneously, and that's that. So in the event of, whereas compared to a traditional payment means, for example, if you make a cross-border purchase with a credit card, then you have some recourse when you deal with the bank, you can freeze the funds, etc. So I wanted to ask Vasudevan a question. In terms of safeguards, do you see a need for equivalent or even heightened safeguards for cross-border RTP? Or conversely, is this something that is just a matter of time and user familiarity?
Actually, whatever be the level of user familiarity, the expectations of multiple options for raising issues, disputes, or getting redressal will always be there from the customer. So that we have to take care. If I take the example of UPI, the onboarding is a very like safe and secure process. We have the device binding, we have the transactions having a requirement of a PIN or a OTP depending on the type of service provider. And we do have a situation where, for example, in the case of UPI, we have enabled the online dispute resolution system as well. So the disputes can be raised by the customers if they have an issue online, and they can get a redressal online as well. And in the case of the Reserve Bank of India, when we are looking at some of these service providers, we also have the ombudsman or banking ombudsman who are there who can take care of this customer complaints. And we also have this turnaround time that has been specified by the regulator within which a dispute needs to be solved by different stakeholders. So multiple options are there. Obviously, the customer convenience has to be taken care of irrespective of the value of the transaction. And that is where we can have a buy-in from the user. Once his experience is good, definitely is going to be there for long. And each of the stakeholders have a responsibility to take care of their own customers, be it the fintechs, be it the big techs, be it the banks, be it the non-banks, who are all part of the things. See, it is equally possible to bring in certain checks at both ends. For example, if I transfer money from my account to a beneficiary, I can put in a check that the beneficiary will not be able to draw the money for say 30 minutes till I complete every activity, till I wait for my customer to complain. But then that takes away the charm of an online transaction or a fast payment transaction. So we have to always see how we balance comfort and convenience, safety and security all in one piece. Anything is possible in the real-time world. The APIs can take care of anything. But if you bring in too many checks, probably there will be a delay in the funds being accessed. There may be some people who are uncomfortable. So if you provide certain additional checks, it could be safe for the regulators and other people on both sides. Over a period of time, based on the country experiences, we can always modify, dovetail, review the various conditionalities, and then design the systems. But obviously, base minimum, there has to be the access channels for redress for the customer, irrespective of the value of the transaction. Thank you.
Thank you, Vasu. Turning to the Q&A, now there's a question there about what's the role of banks in these linkages, these RTP linkages we're pursuing. Obviously, right now, it's the banks as the primary participants, at least vis-a-vis the Pay Now Prompt Pay linkage. But we also know, and I think Vasu's made a point, that all of us have the payment service providers, PSPs, in our ecosystem. And some of these are big techs, social media conglomerates, super apps. So they are very big players. In future, when we build these linkages, will banks continue to be the primary actors, or maybe to put it the other way around, would we balk if PSPs turned out to be the primary users of these linkages? Could I turn to AG Praziali?
Yeah, thank you. I think what you raise is a very important point. And it's important to know that the end game here is we want a system that's safe, fast, instantaneous. And certainly what we have now, is bound to improve going forward, especially with all these players coming in. So in the Malaysian experience, we have this thing called I always struggle with this word, co-opetition, where, we allow the industry, be it banks and the non-bank payment service providers come in and collaborate, especially at the infra level. So that's when, we do away with the kind of problems that we have, especially with dedicated systems to cater for each respective PSPs or banks. So they cooperate at the infrastructure level such that the competition can come at the product level. So in a way, so through experience, for example, we can see this system works. We can actually roll out things faster, and we can actually have good products coming in. And certainly the competition that we talk about at the product level certainly augurs well, such that we don't end up with monopolistic arrangements in the payment system ecosystem. So at the end of the day, to the extent that you have the primary users are the biggest beneficiaries, they end up with a safe system that's quick and easy to use. So from the point of view of the regulator, we shouldn't be too concerned about who owns or who is behind these systems. Thank you.
Thank you, Praziali. I think one last question that I have, because I'm conscious of the time, and it's a forward-looking question, and this one would go to Siritida. I think you mentioned earlier there was a future payment services roadmap that was in play. And of course, some of the emerging technologies aside from RTP are also DLT-based solutions, and that's something that Bank of Thailand is quite keen in. I think some of the global consensus is circling around stable coins and CBDCs, which could address the same cross-border challenges we're facing today, and perhaps even more elegantly. I just wanted to seek your thoughts here. How will these experimental DLT technologies interplay with the RTP linkages that we're trying to build now? Is there a convergence that you see that possibly DLT will underpin or even work together with RTP in future?
Yes. So also we see that at present, the cutting edge technology has driven innovation in cross-border payment and remittance in many aspects. And for our view, wearing the regulator hat, we realize the benefit of adopting this technology to address long-standing pain point in the area of cross-border transfer and remittance. but each technology has its own benefit. For example, the real-time retail payment system linkage, such as PromptPay, PayNow, has leveraged domestic infrastructure to facilitate cross-border transaction. And this help to lower marginal costs and encourage fast adoption due to good user experience. And the linkage can be considered as solution for cross-border connectivity between two corridors. For the foreseeable future, we expect many technological trend and alternative for cross-border payment service, and look for a way to embrace them. And this will also address various segments for customer needs for individual business and also a trade related payment. And we welcome any innovation that add value to our ecosystem, but they must be under appropriate risk management. And the way we do it, we see that our regulatory sandbox is a case in point, which act like an experimental framework for innovation in cross-border service with blockchain technology. And we will continuously monitor and promote the infrastructure which can be leveraged to support this innovation. I think that we see that the flexibility and close monitoring and working along with the service provider are the approach that we would like to apply for any new innovative digital financial service.
Prazyali, a quick one.
Yeah, quick one. I think yes, it's certainly an exciting time to be in the payment sphere. But maybe it's not just about technology. You know, the technology comes in varied forms, and we have certainly benefited from it. Maybe it's a time that we pay more attention to things like governance, processes, consumer education. Let's not forget that these are also very, very important elements. And certainly in events like this where we talk and engage, it certainly plays a crucial part for us to go into a better state going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Prazyali. And then on that note, I think we are just about out of time. This discussion could easily have gone on another hour at least. But that said, I'm conscious that there is an equally exciting, if not more exciting, discussion that's just around the corner on Project Nexus. So I think without further ado, thank you to all our panelists for spending some time here with us today. Thank you for your comprehensive insights. And I'll hand over to Joe, who's going to moderate the next panel. Joe?
Okay. Thank you, Lionel.
Thank you, Lionel, and our panelists for the really good conversation on bilateral cross-border payment linkages in part 2 of this Green Shoots session. We will take that conversation further into the next generation of payments connectivity on a multilateral platform. Now, this July, the Bank for International Settlements Innovation Hub, Singapore Center, published a concept paper titled Project Nexus. Project Nexus is a proposed blueprint that outlines how countries can fully integrate their payment system onto a single cross-border network. Joining me for the discussion are two experts on this project, Arif and Ben. Good to see you guys. Arif Khan, Chief Digital Officer, National Payments Corporation of India. Arif leads the strategic planning and technology for digital transformation at MPCI. He was previously Chief Innovation Officer at Razorpay, one of the fastest growing payment gateways. Arif is also a big football fan, and especially an ardent fan of Man City. Mid-table at the moment, but not to worry, there's a long season ahead. Can catch up. Now turning to Ben Dyson, advisor and Nexus project lead, BIS in Singapore. Prior to joining the hub in September last year, Ben was at the Bank of England, where he led their work on CBDCs. Now these days, Ben is working his way up to cycling around the whole of Singapore. Now that he's moved to a small island, he could do that, but can't get used to waking up at 5 a.m. to avoid the tropical sun. I don't blame you, Ben. And these days, you also have to avoid the floods. But anyway, turning to Project Nexus, how did Project Nexus come about, Ben, staying with you? What was the main problem statement that the project sought to address? I think in the Q&A, we have quite a lot of questions on this. regarding linking up different retail payment systems together. Why is a model like PromptPay Pay Now, for example, not sufficient in your opinion?
Thanks, Joe. We looked at the success of the PromptPay Pay Now link, and you can see, we've heard today about the benefits this has for users. The challenge that comes up when you try to scale this into a global cross-border payment network is, okay, Singapore connects to Thailand. The two different systems work differently. There are different processes, maybe different regulations, and different data standards. You find a way around those problems, and then you want to connect to another country, and you find everything is different there, and another country, and eventually all of these differences start to create a lot of complexity. If you grow this network to the point where there's 20 countries, for example, you actually have 190 bilateral links between payment systems, and it becomes very expensive and very complex to build all of those connections. So we do want more connections between instant payment systems because of these benefits. And what Nexus was about was finding a easier way to connect one payment system to another, and ultimately to connect multiple different payment systems in different countries. So it's a piece of technology that standardizes the way that different payment systems speak to each other to allow instant cross-border payments.
Thanks, Ben. And now turning to Arif. So Arif, how is Project Nexus relevant to India? What are NPCI's motivations for contributing to the concept paper? And if I could just slip in one question from the audience, which was provided also by your friend Kaustep regarding sanction checks. Maybe you could also help shed some light on how this helps with that aspect.
Sure. So I think, Joe, anyone who has heard the previous panel and heard the CGM from RBI, I think why for us it becomes very important to participate in something is pretty evident and clear, right? With $80 billion coming into the country as remittance, the highest in the world, right? And growing. There was a need. Today, it's not that remittance is not happening, but the way it is happening, I would say it's a little bit unstructured. What it means that it brings a lot of inefficiency in the ecosystem. And because of the inefficiency, obviously the cost per transaction, again, which was highlighted in the previous panel, the cost is high. The entire process around, in case there is a dispute or in case there is a callback of a transaction, it needed to be looked at. I think as Ben highlighted, right? In my opinion, it's a foundation layer. How do we structure and create these standards where more than one participant or more than one corridor could easily fit in, right? So every time, for example, there are some 15 countries that contribute to around 85% of the remittance that comes into the country. So imagine each bank or each entity having an individual one-to-one corridor, the lack of standardization, the lack of the process over there. And whenever you're doing cross-border, there's a whole lot of compliances that need to be followed, right? So there is a possibility when everyone adopts individually, there could be some misses over there. And then you take that and you say, if you can have one railroad as a foundation layer, which allows multiple parties, multiple corridors to talk, look at the efficiency it brings, not only in terms of the capability and operations around it, but also on the technology. For example, the infrastructure cost contributes to the transaction cost, which eventually a customer bears. So can we reduce that cost? And when you talk about life cycle management, how do you standardize it? The earlier panel, they also spoke about why not give them a very domestic payment-like experience, right? So Swapnendu spoke about how they've done Pay Now, one click, simple, safe, secure. And then the CGM from India spoke about how we can give those value-added services where they can do cross-border transaction. They could shop in a country like Singapore using the same app they have in India. He spoke about the prepaid vouchers. I think all these possibilities open up when you have the right foundation and the standard. It brings everyone together and allows domestic, we largely are a domestic scheme at this point in time. It allows us to bring all those value adds to our customers, right? Irrespective, as they mentioned, right? It's borderless, seamless kind of efficiency and experiences. So clearly it is extremely important to us. One of the key motivators for us is as we in India try to build these railroads, right? I think it was important for us that we collaborate with BIS to understand, because they're getting a global experience, they're seeing a lot of corridors. The Singapore leg was participating in. So it allows us to learn and not only understand what is there currently, but what is expected in the future. And as we build, I think this could be extremely, extremely useful for us. Sorry, I did not get my friend's question. If you could just replay that.
No worries. Yeah. So Calstep, as well as another member of the audience, was asking about compliance and AML and how these sanction checks do work out in the Nexus model. But I thought maybe that's something that Ben could also start off by answering. And I also wanted to ask Ben in this particular question. So what elements do you think, now that you've published the paper, you may have improved? Were you given maybe a little bit more time or resources, or maybe in a version 2 of this paper? And then later I'll come back to Arif on your views on how this improves compliance and AML sanction checks.
Well, that's a good question. And to be honest, I think sanctions checks are probably the hardest part of this. What tends to happen with the traditional cross-border payment is the payment instruction is sent. It has all the information about the sender and the recipient. And if either the sender or the recipient matches a name on the sanctions list, that payment may be sent to compliance, and it may wait for somebody to manually review that payment. On average, when that happens, you have a 15 to 24-hour delay to the payment. And you can't have instant payment systems. You can't have instant payments that have 24-hour delays. So we had to look for a way to overcome this. The challenge, some of the existing cross-border instant payments, the policy that has been applied has just to say, if you have a match, then just reject the payment. But it leads to probably 10 to 15% of legitimate payments getting rejected. And the sender has no way to resolve that. What we have proposed in Nexus is, so Nexus doesn't do the sanction screening for the banks. It's still responsibility of the banks. But what we've tried to build in is mechanisms for the banks to be able to communicate with each other using APIs automatically. And the aim is, rather than just sending the payment instruction and then the recipient bank saying, well, I'm sorry, we can't accept this because it matches somebody on the list, is to pre-screen that payment, and for the recipient bank to say, okay, at the moment, I can't accept this, but when you send the instruction, if you can add some additional information like the date and place of birth or the address, that should be enough for me to establish if it really is the person on the sanctions list, or if actually this is just a legitimate payment and I should approve it. In terms of your question about what else needs further work, we fully expect the sanctions side of this to be the most challenging part in turning this into something in the real world.
So the audience has been quite astute in pointing out what really matters here. Arif, any response to that particular issue?
I've been part of those discussions. I completely agree with Ben. And just to add on to what Ben mentioned, right, I think the data richness and the ability to curate as part of the pre-screening, I think that would really help. So that would take away some, I don't think it will take away all the challenges that we have. I think we'll have to work around that. But I think that as an entity, as an API already is a part of the construct. So that should solve for a lot of it. But I think that's the whole idea as we move into the next stage. While the sanctions would not be done within the Nexus framework, if I say, but it actually allows on the edge a lot of these actors to come in and kind of contribute to that. So that should help.
And you've given me a very nice segue into the next part of our conversation, which is about bringing the concept into practice, right, Ben? So what are your plans next for Project Nexus as a matter of next steps? What do you hope to see come out of this publication when put into practice?
Well, what we've released so far is a blueprint. So we have proposed processes and message flows and API specifications. And that's based on a lot of work with colleagues at the Monetary Authority of Singapore and with the MPCI and other payment system operators. But it's still a blueprint at this point. So the next step for us is to do a technical proof of concept, and that will involve connecting three payment systems, 3 real payment systems in the real world. And what that will help us to do is test whether the blueprint works in reality. It will probably tease out some of the additional challenges and will help us to see if Nexus is flexible enough to accommodate all the different designs of instant payment systems that are out there. And what we'll have at the end of it is some working software and hopefully very detailed API specifications that can then be used as the basis for a real world production system that would handle real money.
And on that note, Arif, as a domestic national payment rail operator, what excites you about a concept like putting Nexus into production? And actually, if because Nexus is comprises a series of gateways and also an overarching scheme. So if the Nexus scheme is run by a third party, how would a domestic scheme operator like yourself fit into that particular equation?
So I think even before I get to that, right, just to carry from the previous one, which Ben mentioned, and I think we all feel very passionately about it. And clearly as tech guys, we want to take it to the next stage. And I would say, it's like the Nexus has come out as a base chassis, right? So the chassis now needs to be validated, for the center of gravity, how can it be stretched and how flexible it could be. I think once we do that, there could be more pilots coming on as to how the blocks sit on it and how it operates, right? So I think that's the key part for us, and that will really tell us where and what direction we are heading, and how efficient this works out to be. Having said that, I think for any remittance to be successful, I believe that you need to have a very strong domestic remittance scheme that exists, and that's in the shape of NPCI, UPI, and a couple of the other products that we run, right? And again, there's a very interesting piece to Nexus. I'm not sure if everyone has looked at it with that details, but there is an article or there is a chapter on roles versus entities, right? So if one goes through that, it actually allows you to think through how the different actors could play roles, whether it's banks or operators like ourselves and all. So I think in that there's a room for everybody in different shape and form. And one, you could be doing multiple roles as a single actor, and I think time will solve for that. But I'm really kicked about it, and I think we'll have a key role to play in this. It could be in different shapes and different fashions. A very simple thing, for example, how do you make it easy for a consumer or a remitter to identify a beneficiary? We could have a role to play in that. How do you do address resolutions? We spoke about aliases in different parts of the world. They could be something equivalent to an email ID or a mobile number. We could have a role to play in that. We clearly could have a role to play to dip into the banks, because as NPCI, as a payment railroad in the country, we are already connected to more than 1,200 banks in the country. We are dipping into their CBS. So I think time will say what is the role we'll play. But clearly, I think not only for NPCI, but banks in the country, startups in the country, fintechs in the country, app providers, I think this is an opportunity for all of them to come together.
Thanks, Arif. And Ben, your response to that, where do you see the role of the domestic payment switch, for example?
Yeah, I think something like this, it has to be led by the payment system operators. The BIS Innovation Hub, we can play a role in bringing some of those parties together and thinking about the kind of systemic issues in building a global payment system. But ultimately, these guys are the experts in how you actually make this work in practice. So we're keen to support this work, but when this goes into the real world, eventually it has to be led by the payment system operators.
Yeah, and speaking of the real world, actually, Arif, there was also a good question from the audience on what do you think would be the biggest technical challenge here in putting Nexus into production? Clearly, we know some of the very good pain points that Nexus can help to alleviate, but what do you think might be one of the key challenges when you actually put this into production?
So I think on the core tech side, I really don't see a very big challenge. The way this is shaping up, I think we will be in a very good position to adapt to that. I think the challenge would be related to the process and the standards, and especially related to compliance. I think baselining that would be the key. Of course, there are technology ways to handle it. There are, you could identify different actors who could play the role. So, but I think the technology is not the big worry for me. As to getting the entire ecosystem together to agree on something. And obviously, we're not just talking about one or two corridors. over here, right? We're talking about number of corridors, and especially for India, I think it's the top 15 corridors, including the US, Australia, UK, Singapore, Middle East, of course. So I think those, the sanctions, the compliance, I think that's where there would be a challenge. But again, I'm not very overly worried about that because pre-panel, they were, it was represented by regulators. And I think they are the ones who really, kind of envision this and help people like us, actors like us to, kind of get that done. So yeah, but there is some work to be done on that side.
And on that very optimistic note, turning to you now, Ben, for the final question, where do you see international payments in the next 5 years? So bring us to 2026, for example.
Yeah, well, there's so much innovation happening at the moment, and it's not just things like Nexus. There's a lot of the large cross-border payment players, familiar names, are working on solving these problems. How do you speed up cross-border payments? How do you lower the cost? There's a lot of fintech innovations in there as well. So I see a lot of this work paying off over the next few years, and it should become cheaper and easier to make those cross-border payments. The one risk is that you end up with a really fragmented landscape. So if you want to send money to country A, you have to find this service. And if you want to send it to country B, you need to search for another service. And that's why we should think about things like interoperability between the different systems. How do you connect the instant payment systems? And also how do you connect to other payment systems as well, beyond just instant payments?
Yeah, indeed. Interoperability is going to be the common denominator for how we can all interlink together. And Arif, what's your 5-year dream here?
I've been always, when it comes to payments, a lot of payments are screened based on rules. And I think it's time that it becomes risk-based rather than rule-based, because there's a lot of opportunity loss and there's a lot of customer dissonance. And I think Ben spoke about it right at the start. If you have the right enriched data and the ability to curate, I think we can move to rule-based. So clearly, I think that's one, I think in a couple of years, we should be looking at that. The other one is, getting the right experiences for the remitter and the beneficiary both. For example, a lot of the money that gets remitted back to the country, especially in the case of India. So for example, if $100 is coming into the country and someone with us, the daughter of the house is sending to her elderly parents, the $1,000 which she sends to her parents, a lot of that money goes towards rent, electricity bills, and so on and so forth. So the question in my mind always is, why can't she pay the bill directly from there, right? Why does she need to transfer the entire bulk to her parents' account? And then there is so how do you simplify that? There is friction in that, there is money movement, and then someone has to act upon it. Why can't it be directly originating from Singapore or from UAE or from the US? So I think whatever is available on the domestic side, I think can be then made available to the same set of customers on the overseas side. And I think that's where, we really reach that stage where more and more people would actually want to come into the formal way of doing remittance, small tickets, and make it easier for them, right? I mean, how often do you get a reminder, hey, it's time for you to send money home? I think those kind of experience will come into play. Or just imagine, I messaging my brother saying, dude, why don't you send me some money? And, he gets a pop-up or something like that, or a QR code and those kind of things.
Sounds like a vision that we can all share. Thank you, Arif, and thank you, Ben, for your insights on Nexus. I think this was very beneficial for everyone. And thank you too to our audience for spending your afternoon with us. Before you go, don't forget to fill out the poll that will be coming up on your screen shortly. Please rate the session, as your feedback is very important to us, and ultimately will make it better for you as well, our audience. We have a few exciting Green Shoot sessions coming over the next few weeks. You can register right now by scanning the QR code on your screen right here. And also, as you know, the Singapore Fintech Festival is happening this November. Tickets are now available at early bird prices, which end on 15th September. That's the date to note, so please register by then. And with this, on behalf of the SFF team, thank you all for your time this afternoon. Stay safe and goodbye.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you very much.